Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. My name is Reed. Mike's still a little bit busy 'cause he's taking on a few projects right now, so um, he'll be on as much as he possibly can be. But been a couple weeks, haven't really talked about the best new comics in a while. A couple lower weeks of comics. I think there has been some solid stuff from like Incredible Hulk, but today, what I wanted to do was actually spotlight a comic that came out a week ago and spotlight the series that I think is the best Marvel series going right now. Earlier this year, there was a great Sabretooth comic book that came up from Marvel, Sabretooth, The Dead Don't Talk. I think that was a really strong contender for the best Marvel series of this year. It was very old school feel, a lot of action, kind of like an old 80s sort of action film sort of feel to it. But a recent launch featuring probably my two favorite Marvel characters, two of my three favorite Marvel characters, Spider-Man and Wolverine. This is a series that is on its third issue. You've had Mark Guggenheim and Kari Andrews on the art on this book. And I gotta say, this is exactly what folks I think will want from Marvel Comics, in that this is essentially Marvel taking their two most popular characters, or two of their most popular characters, throwing them in a book together, and just letting it be an action-packed adventure. And I think overall, it's really, really working well. And there's a couple reasons this works. It's surprising to me that we haven't seen these two in an ongoing before. I know there's been sort of mini series and a lot of team ups, and they were in the New Avengers and all that with Spider-Man and Wolverine. But it's a really interesting dynamic to have these two characters, and hopefully this book goes on for a while. And that it's the classic buddy cop scenario. Logan is the overly serious, gruff old guy. Peter is the young gun who makes a lot of jokes and things like that. And you see the two argue, you see them fight, you see them team up. It's a great comic, and so I think I'm going to highlight a little bit of why I think this is working really, really well. And then I'll probably touch a little bit on where these characters are. So overall, what I think is working for Spider-Man and Wolverine, one, they built the comic on a really interesting premise. The reason for these two, a couple of their villains have teamed up. They've been forced into a scenario where they're fighting each other. And so there's kind of an unreliable narrative piece to it. But the main narrative twist that has carried the first three issues is that with Peter Parker's parents being spies, um, Peter has kind of uncovered or been given information that makes it appear that Logan was actually the one who killed his parents on the plane crash that they were in, that he was there and that he was responsible for their deaths. Now, Logan, because of the unreliable memory piece of him and not recalling things, can't really, adjudicate himself out of that. And so you really have a lot of conflict between the two. And what's great is it fits perfectly with the two characters. And I think a lot of times when you see two characters fighting each other, it feels stupid, it feels forced. I think one of the things is they found a piece of Peter Parker's past with his parents and their death. It's something that he doesn't really know about, and that's something obviously that would be a devastating event for him that would make him very angry. And then you found this perfect corner of Logan's past where he obviously has a shady past. He's done a lot of things in the background that he doesn't recall. And so you put those two together in a blender, it creates a perfect conflict between the two characters, and that they're friends, but you have this huge, huge issue that pops up. And I think, unlike a lot of comic books that sort of force the heroes against each other, where it just seems like, why would these two not have been able to talk this out? This is such a kind of visceral sort of thing that it makes sense that the two would have this. The first issue, there's a lot of cool things in this about them just sort of teaming up. But I think Kari Andrews' work's not for everybody. But I do think it's really cool to see, him just kind of draw these characters in these very action-packed, almost He-Man action figure-esque sort of poses and things like that. And I think it's cool. They had a great part in the first episode issue where Wolverine has to relive some of Spider-Man's past. Spider-Man has to relive some of Wolverine's. And I thought that was a really cool narrative device that he used. You also just get some really cool shots from the comic. What I think overall they are doing well, and this is where issue two was great, is it's just action packed and full of just punch after punch and fight after fight, well choreographed. Issue two is largely this huge knockdown, drag out fight between Spider-Man and Wolverine. And I think one of the things is, comic books I've always thought should just have fun more often than try to be serious or groundbreaking. And I think we've gotten obsessed in the recent years with trying to have comics say something or too much decompression. And look, that works in a book like Watchmen, that works in a book like The New Frontier, things like that, where the writer is trying to make a grand statement or has sort of this overall arcing narrative that's supposed to be over a limited issue count. But when you have an ongoing series, while I think it's okay every once in a while to sort of stop and pivot and have a slow issue, I think what you need to do more than anything though is have some freaking action in the comic. When you pick up a Spider-Man comic, you pick up a Wolverine comic, because yes, you're interested in Logan's life, you're interested in Peter Parker's life, but you also want to see these characters fight. You want to see their skills. You want to see what they can do. And I think they've done a great job of putting together a narrative purpose that explains why these two would be at odds with each other. And then just Kari Andrews knocking it out of the park with some of these drawings that are just really, really cool. Kind of these action figure-esque looking fights that fit perfectly for the medium. I think the other thing they're doing is they are playing a lot upon nostalgia. So you see kind of in the comics, they're switching between classic costumes when they're in the yellow and yellow and blue for Wolverine, the classic red for Spidey. Next issue, kind of switch it up and they're in different costumes. And so there is this sort of thing of they don't know who they're being manipulated by. A couple of their villains, like Craven and different ones, are involved in this, and they might be manipulating the circumstances around it. But again, one of the cool things is you've sort of mixed in this really cool sort of revenge plot for Spider-Man where he really wants to take down Wolverine now for what he's done. Wolverine has this unreliable narrative thing that he doesn't know whether he actually did this. And then you throw the two in a circumstance where they have to work with each other. In addition to the absolute contrasting personalities, it's really, really strong as a book. And I think one of the things is I know for a lot of folks, if you're tired of the baggage of Marvel Comics, and I think personally right now, well, I think Joe Kelly's done a good job the last couple of issues. Amazing Spider-Man's been a book that's been disappointing for a long time. Wolverine, sadly, has been on the same sort of thing, and then I think character-wise, Marvel has sort of lost the heart of who those two characters are. Wolverine, in my opinion, has become way too affable, way too friendly, way too nice. I don't mind him being heroic, but he's just become like everybody's lovable uncle in the X-Men, and I don't love that role for him. I think he should always have some edge to him. And Spider-Man, I think one of the things they've done with him is they've just emphasized him being a loser too much, where it's just the comic is about suffering and misery. And so I think what's really cool with this is actually leaning into who these two characters are really well. You got a lot of the gruff edge of Wolverine back. You got a lot of the smart alecky, sort of determined heroism that Peter has and that defines him. You know, Peter, being defined by his tragedy and by his loss and his love for his family. I just think there's so many cool elements that Guggenheim's pulling at. And if you have not picked up a Spider-Man comic book in a decade, this is going to be a comic that you can pick up, start reading. You're not going to be confused. And I think the same thing for Wolverine. If you haven't picked up a Wolverine comic in a while, it sort of picks these characters up in a classic place where you're like, okay, if you love Wolverine and you love Spider-Man, you're going to find the character that you like in this. And I think that's what comic books have to do more often, is that so many times now we're obsessed with these new narrative devices or new plot lines or new stories that we're doing. And I think that's great, except for they keep resetting those. And so for the longtime fans, you kind of lose the investment in that. Okay, this is supposed to be this, multi-decade story that you're reading, but they keep hitting the reset button. But then if you're a new fan, they will also occasionally keep these very obscure details that make it very hard to enter. And so I think this is a great entryway point. If you have ever liked Wolverine, if you've ever liked Spider-Man, I think it's a great comic book. It's fun, it's action-packed, it's intriguing. It's great. The only caveat to it, I personally think he does a great job. I think Kari Andrews was a great artist for this. His art will not be for everybody. And so if you're more someone who wants the classic pencil sort of look of like a Jim Lee or something like that, this isn't going to have that. It is a little more visceral and a little more cartoonish. For sure. I think it fits perfectly for the book that they're using, but I certainly could understand why some folks would put off by this. But I really hope this book succeeds. I think through 3 issues, this has been the most fun read that Marvel's had in quite a while, especially between these two characters. I don't know if I like it quite as well as the Sabretooth series from earlier this year, and that I thought that was a really cool series that sort of hit it out of the park. But I think right now, if you're looking for a Marvel comic book, and I know, we read the comments on here, me and Mike do it at times, we see a lot of folks who are just kind of done with Marvel. They're sort of to the point where it's like, I don't like what they've done, and I get that. I'm not telling anybody that you should, reinvest. But I do think if you're someone who loves comic books, who really loves these characters, and just wants to see a book that has Spider-Man and Wolverine as you know them, the classic representations of the character, I think this is great. And then I think you could take somebody who has just watched X-Men 97 and just watched Spider-Man movies or Spider-Man cartoons and have them read this comic, and it would make sense to them. because they're nailing the classic representations of the character well, and it's really well executed. So definitely wanted to sit on here and kind of recommend that for you guys. I think it's a great series. It's worth checking out. Could it fall off? Of course. Mark Guggenheim, not the most reliable writer in terms of long-term story runs, but I do think through 3 issues, it's been an excellent comic. And one of the things is I don't want to be, we're on this channel, we're always critiquing things. And then when something good comes out, we don't really talk about it or highlight it or spotlight it well. And so, I think we if you're going to call stuff out, you also need to make sure that when Marvel and DC do something good, you should call that out too. And then I think too often things just become about dunking on Marvel and DC and pulling their worst books and getting angry about it and stuff like that. And I think that's just not the case with this book. This is a great book that I think is perfectly what is needed in the market. 2 great characters in their classic representations, just having fun and embracing all the classic comic stuff. I think it's definitely worth you guys checking out as well. Real quickly here at the end, this was not a great week of comics. We'll get back next week to doing the best new comics and things like that. I did think there were a couple that I'll kind of just briefly touch on. Really, for me, there were only 4 issues that were great this week, or not great, but pretty solid. And then one that I'm going to spotlight. Me and Michael actually do a video. He's got some time today, so we're going to record that and talk about it a little more in depth. But I would recommend Ultimate Wolverine #8. I think Ultimate Wolverine's been one of the biggest surprises in comic books. They're doing a great job. I think it's what Conrad on the story on this. He's doing a great job, and Capuccio on the or Condon, sorry, and Capuccio. One of the things that they're doing really well with this is this is more Wolverine as I would want to see him as a fan. He's got a little bit of his edge, and in the book, he's now sort of retained his memory. He's back to being the character that you want, but thrown in this obviously weird world of the Ultimate Universe. There's a lot of action. There's some great character moments for Logan in this, and I think Ultimate Wolverine is capturing more of what a Wolverine book should be. Very similar to where Ultimate Spider-Man is doing. Sadly, it seems like the Ultimate Universe is going to end. I know we've only got 4 issues left of both of those series. But I would definitely recommend Ultimate Wolverine #8. Ultimate Wolverine overall as a series, I think, has been very, very entertaining. Another one I would recommend as well, Absolute Superman #10. I don't think this was a fantastic issue, but I do think if you've been interested in the story, this kind of firmly plants some of the seeds of this last arc to where you sort of know where the book is going. I think it's a really interesting integration of Ra's al Ghul and sort of Talia al Ghul and that whole element into the world of Superman. And again, I wouldn't love it in a mainline Superman book, but I do think for a absolute universe where the whole idea is let's throw things in a blender and mix it up, I think it actually creates some interesting angles to it. There's some pretty good action with this. It sort of show up a showdown between Superman and the Peacemaker character that's been in here. Overall, I think it's an interesting book. I'm not the biggest Jason Aaron guy, but I do think he has done a pretty good job on this series. I'm interested to see where it goes. Again, not like 100% sold on it. I certainly understand critiques of it, and it's kind of an issue to issue basis for me with this book. But I think through 10 issues, it's actually doing pretty well. Next 2 that I would recommend, Red Hulk #7. It largely continues to just build on the narrative that's been there for Red Hulk, and this has been a huge surprise for me. I don't think this is a fantastic comic. I just think it's a solidly reliable one, and that this has been based on sort of this large prison break that Red Hulk, Deathlock, and Machine Man have triggered. They were captured by Doctor Doom. They had a prison break. They escaped. And so it's taken a lot of narrative twists and turns capitalizing on that. There's a character named Warwolf that Red Hulk kind of clashes with in this book. It is a little bit of a slower issue, but I do think this has been a fun comic that just reminds me of what we used to get on the spinner racks at old school comic shops, where it's just a fun, reliable narrative. It's not something that's like remarkable or going to change the way you view comics or anything like that. But I do think there's a lot of fun to be had with it, and I'd recommend that series overall as well. Last one I'll sort of highlight, Moon Knight Fists of Khonshu #11. Jed MacKay, this is sort of an anniversary issue, so this is celebrating the 50th anniversary of Moon Knight. It is a little bit of a touchy-feely comic book, and there's a lot of dialogue, not too much action in it. But I thought it was a cool highlight of all the characters that have been spotlighted in MacKay's run lately. And I think it's always cool when comic books step outside a little bit and do like an anniversary issue for a character. Overall, this Moon Knight run has just been solidly reliable, and I think Jed MacKay's done a great job on it from the very first issue. A little bit of a weird narrative step in the middle when they killed off Moon Knight for a bit, but I think overall that book has been very solid and reliable. And so if you want something that just every month you can pick up and it'll be entertaining, I think that book is the one for you. Last book I'll mention, Captain America #2. This is the book Mike and I are going to sort of spotlight. A lot of talk about this comic book. I think overall, I didn't see anything inherently sort of wrong with this book. I didn't enjoy it as much as the first issue. There has been a lot of talk about the military portrayal in this, and so I'm not going to. If you're a military veteran, I'm not going to sit here and tell you how you should or shouldn't feel about anything in the book. There's some things in here about the America's involvement in the Iraq War and things like that that I know have rubbed some folks the wrong way. Mike and I are going to do a long form video talking about that, and that I do think it's always an interesting thing of when a comic book like Captain America or Marvel tackles real world issues, and that I don't think it's anything too over the top in this book, but I do think it can rub some folks the wrong way. And so Mike and I are going to talk a little bit about sort of the integration of real world things into Marvel and how we view that, and some of the critiques that we've seen of the book as well. If you have read it, I'd be interested in your guys' thoughts down below. But as always, folks, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what was in your stack for the week. What was the best book that you picked up? And if you've checked out Spider-Man and Wolverine, let me know down below if you've been enjoying it as much as I have. Thanks as always for watching. God bless you, folks.